You know, the drummer's great in this.
Forget what you learned in school.
I like him.
Never mind what your parents told you, and disregard what your friends say. From now on, the only people you need to listen to are these guys. For the next several minutes, they'll take you on a journey through the political jungle. When your journey is over and you're safe at home, they promise you'll be stronger, smarter, and just plain better. So buckle up, hang on to your ears, because your journey starts now.
Welcome to another episode At Odds. Recorded in the back room of the Doubleheader Barn studio in the greater Lansing area. This song will give you a little bit of an indication of what our show will be about today. Gotta love Pink Floyd.
Love that bass guitar in there.
We are just another brick in the wall. Some days we feel like that, don't we? I think today's show we're going to discuss a little bit about the history of public education in the United States, what we can do to maybe improve it, where we came and where we're going. Education. Teacher, leave us alone. And we're just another brick in the wall. Welcome to At Odds.
Hello.
Hey, Nate, how you doing today?
Not too bad. How are you doing, Brian?
Not too bad at all. We're going to talk about education, and we'll give you a brief overview of education in the United States. First American schools opened in the 17th century, of course, when we came over here in the 1600s. Primarily from England, but, you know, other European countries, Dutch as well. But
were they American schools?
They were not American schools at that
Okay.
point. They
All
were
right.
colonial schools. And the first colonial school was the Boston Latin School, which was founded in 1635. And guess what?
What?
It's still in existence today.
Still used?
Still is a high school.
That's pretty cool.
It's the first public school and the oldest existing school in the United States. Now, traditionally, colonists generally used the traditional English method of family, church, community, and apprenticeships to teach young people how to get along in the world, later becoming key agents in the socialization of education. The rudiments of literacy and arithmetic were taught inside the family, and literacy rates seem to have been very much higher in the New England area than they were in the South, which may or may not be true today, but I'm not going to say that. By the 18th century, common schools appeared, and students of all ages were under the control of one teacher and one school. Although they were publicly supplied by a local town or township or community, they weren't free like they are today, and we say free in
Yeah.
the strictest sense. They were supported by tuition or a rate bill that parents paid for their kids to go to school, and it was primarily boys. As we know, because, you know, boys were considered the movers and shakers of society, and women were to be at home and raise the children. Until around the Revolution, where we had the idea of the Republican motherhood. And the idea was that women were important in helping to raise and support the Republic in this new country, and this helped to promote education for women, which still lagged behind men at this time. After the Revolution, an emphasis was put on education, especially in the northern states. with rapidly established public schools. In larger towns, New England opened grammar schools, which were the forerunners of modern high schools. And by 1780s, most had been replaced by private academies, right? Many of those private academies still exist today. They were known as prep schools, the elite private schools that are still many in existence today and were the, the stepping stone for the Ivy League colleges and the well-to-do in New England. 1821, Boston started the first public high school in the United States. And by the close of the 19th century, public secondary schools began to outnumber private ones. And by the mid-19th century, the role of schools had expanded to such an extent that many of the educational tasks traditionally handled by parents became the responsibility of the schools and therefore the state and local governments. And by 1870, all states had free elementary schools. The population had one of the highest literacy rates at the time. Private academies also flourished in towns across the country. But rural areas where most people lived, remember at that time, farmers, had few schools before the 1880s. And by 1900, 34 states had compulsory schooling laws, of which only 4 were in the South. The South kind of lagged behind in many ways. And by 1910, 72% of American children attended high school, or attended schools in general. And half of the nation's children attended one-room schools. 1918, every state required students to complete at least the elementary school. Nate, didn't you at least get through 8th grade?
Just barely, but yeah, I made it through 8th grade.
I barely did too. Enter the Progressive Era, an era that extended from the 1890s to the 1930s. Notable dramatic expansion in the number of schools and students served, especially in the fast-growing metropolitan cities. And after 1910, small cities began building high schools. I live in a small town in Michigan, and it was about 1910, 1920s that we got a high school in our little town. By 1940, 50% of young people had earned a high school diploma. 50%. As you may well know, that the rich opposed taxes on them to help pay for the poor folk because they sent their kids to private academies.
Sure.
Or had private tutors. Now, at this time, fundings varied. Some towns assessed taxes on all households rather than on only those that had children that would benefit from the college, or not college, but from school. And they used the funds to support a grammar school to prepare young boys for college. It's funny because in the early 1800s to mid-1800s, mostly boys were educated. Girls were left at home to raise the families and to tend to the children while the men went out and did men work. And there was a difference that some of the towns would actually educate women, but they'd only educate them to read. They wouldn't teach them to write because they didn't need to learn to write. They only need to learn to read so they can read the Bible and other things for their children. We can talk about religion in school. That's a whole episode unto itself.
Oh, yeah. And it might be.
It depends. And it wasn't until the early 1800s that teachers were trained. Most teachers were not perceived as an end goal in their life to educate people. A lot of teachers were just high school graduates. Some might have gone to 1 or 2 years of college, and it was the normal schools that were teacher schools that either taught a 2-year and sometimes 4-year degree in education. And sort of it progressed from there. And what we're going to talk about, I think, today is what works in our education system, what doesn't, where the funding comes from, who pays for education, should we pay for our children's education, what benefits do they have to society as a whole. So we can go from there. Nate, if you want to take off on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you have some statistics over there of how much.
I do have a few.
A few. How much money comes from the federal government for public primary education?
Well,
if you have that handy or not.
Well, let me just say this, that I don't know if you know this, but the total cost in 2008, because that's the statistic I have, in 2008, the total expenditure for all K through 12 schools, not college, K through 12 schools, was $596 billion. So between $500 and $600 billion are spent on public education. Now, what would you guess? I think I asked you earlier what you thought the federal government's role in that was and how much they paid.
Yeah, and I think you've told me the number since, but my initial guess was around 50%.
Yeah, and I thought it was going to be higher than that, but actually the federal government only pays about $8.3 billion of that $596 billion.
Okay.
So a small portion of federal dollars pays for public school.
I mean,
most of the cost comes from local governments, local taxes, state taxes.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's private taxes. We can look at costs per students. Today, in 2008, I have the data again was 2008. 2008, it cost approximately $10,441 to educate a kid for a year.
For 1 year?
For 1 year.
Okay.
Now, in 1960...
That's a national average?
That's a national average,
okay.
Right. It would vary from area to area, but a national average. But in 1960, and this is adjusted for 2008 dollars, it cost $2,800 to educate a kid for a year. So, 1960, $2,800. 1990, big jump, $7,800. The year 2000, it was $9,000. In 2008, it was $10,000. Big jump. And why has education jumped 212% from 1960 to 1995 when adjusted for inflation? Why does it cost so much more to educate a kid today than it did in 1960? Let's talk about some of those reasons and what we think they are.
Yeah, we can do that. But before we do, you just want to bring up this cabinet shop I found. Saw some of their work. It's called Tuscola Cabinets.
Oh, yeah?
Yep. They do commercial, residential work in the Frankenmuth, Saginaw Bay City, Flint area in Michigan.
In Michigan, yeah.
Yep. I have to tell you, I was surprised by the low price and
is this
the quality I saw.
This is that friend of yours that had some work done.
It is, yeah. Oh, yeah, you saw the work. You saw the work.
It's beautiful work.
Yep. Tuscola Cabinets, they're a certified Korean fabricator and installer, so they can handle your cabinets and your countertop needs.
Yeah.
Solid surface, laminate tops, whatever you need, they'll work with you.
You know, I'd love to get my kitchen redone.
Yeah, if you're interested, you can look them up, TuscolaCabinets.com, or call them. Their phone number is 989-871-2739. That's TuscolaCabinets.com or 989-871-2739.
I'm going to have to give them a call.
But getting back to some of the reasons costs have increased in education, I think some of the reasons costs have gone up is recently we've had this influx of programs to help self-esteem. You know, that's a big focus now is children's self-esteem and helping underprivileged children, probably a lot more, I'm going to call them special ed type classes.
Well, yeah, not only the special ed, but, you know, they have advisors now for kids with special needs, and they have, like, sort of one-on-one staff person.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So that costs more. Technology costs more. Look at the cost of a textbook now.
Yeah.
I mean, they've gone up exponentially. My daughter's college textbook, she paid, $250 for a chemistry book.
Yeah.
When I was in college, it was $30, and that was high. So those things are there. One of the other things, I think, is the increase in the ratio of teacher versus other employees in school systems. According to a 2006 study at the Goldwater Institute in Arizona, they looked at the costs of public school versus private schools. And they found that Arizona public schools spend 50% more per student than Arizona's private schools. And they said that, one of the reasons was that private school staff consisted of 72% teachers.